We really fundamentally believe we are at an inflection point in how business and technology work together. So there are many things happening in business, globalization, the Great Recession, and all these kind of things, but we really became fundamentally convinced that tech is the biggest thing in business today. Because whether you're a strategist, whether you're a supply chain guy, whether you're revamping your customer experience, you can't dissociate the two. And the inflection point bit is that it's becoming much more difficult for companies that cannot integrate technology to actually do well in the marketplace. So that's a premise. And if you're in if you do tech for a living, like many people in this room, it's kind of obvious that you have to integrate technology. If you're a large global corporation in manufacturing or in pharmaceutical, it's less obvious. You have big legacy to actually move forward. So that's what drove us to actually talk to about 500 large companies. So we excluded all the startups and all the Apple, Google, all the guys we love, but to look at really the people that drive, as Andy was saying, something like 94% of the economy. And that's what I'm going to try to describe to you. So it's very hard for a Frenchman to start with good news, but I'll tell you the good news. What we found in the research was, first of all, we found a group of companies that we coined digital masters, that are companies that are really seem to have integrated this technology in a really seamless way in their operation and doing some tremendous things at the customer experience or on their business model and so on. And those digital masters do exist, which is a good news, but the problem, the bad news, was they were few and far between. So they were a minority in the samples that we looked at. The really, really, really good news is when we actually looked and dissect the companies that do that well, our digital master, and say, what is the DNA of what they do well? We found that you can actually codify it. You can research it. You can put it into frameworks, which is really good news because it means that any organization that wants to do this can. It takes leadership, tenacity, investment, resources, and so on. So it's not easy, but everybody can. And we really fundamentally believe that the time to do it is absolutely now. And I'll explain some of the reasons why. So let's start the journey. So who are the companies? So I've taken a small sample of digital masters. These are companies that really are getting tremendous performance, not just performance improvement, but financial performance, and are developing some great customer interactions and engagements with their customers. And some of them you know very well. So of course, if you're in the US, Starbucks, Nike, they're household names. You've heard of all of them. But we found also companies in other sectors, other parts of the world, like Asian Paints, who's the biggest coating company in Asia. They basically do white paint. Okay, how exciting is that? Okay, and yet they're doing some tremendous things in their operations with digital technology. We found a company like Codelco. Some of you may know Codelco. It's a Chilean government-owned mining company. Now, believe me, with my friends from the MIT, we would not have started there to look for digital transformation, but yet we found this company doing absolutely mind-boggling operational improvemement and really changing the nature of how you do mining through digital technologies. So all sectors, all parts of the world, and not just here in San Francisco, we're finding companies that are actually doing tremendous things. So what is it that they do? And we try to boil it down to really some simple frameworks, two really main dimensions. The first one is the most obvious. There is what we call a digital capability aspect of that. So how do you invest in smart technology, smart channels? And this is all the stuff that is outside this room. You know, the social, the mobile, the analytics, the embedded device, sensors, all this kind of stuff that we see every day. And obviously, you can't do digital transformation without investing in digital. So that's kind of the obvious dimension. But there are caveats which I'll talk about. And this is what we call the what of digital transformation. So it's actually the physical investment. But what we found with our digital masters is they did something else extremely well, which is the how, the leadership capability it takes to actually, rather than just sticking technology into your existing processes, it's about how do you actually transform the way that your operations work or the way that your customer experience work. And this dimension, it's kind of the soft side of the equation. It's really about envisioning your transformation and then making it happen. And it's, in our view, just as important as the investment in the technology, if not more. So in my spiel today, I'll refer back to technology, but I will talk a lot about management and leadership because I believe, and my colleague at the MIT believe, that this is what makes a difference. So that's kind of the simple DNA of digital masters. And of course, when you have a 2 academics, a consultant, and 2 dimensions, statistically speaking, you'll end up with a 2-by-2 matrix, which is exactly what happens. Okay, so we try to classify the companies that we looked at into various categories because they are behaving slightly differently. So the digital masters I have already talked about. These are people that are doing a great transformation, but more importantly, there were other companies that were either struggling or going about it in different ways. So beginners, I don't need a large explanation. There are people that either by design or by default were not doing very much with digital technology for all sorts of reasons. Regulation, conservatism, doesn't happen in my industry. I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to let the others make the mistake and be a fast follower. Those kind of attitude. The top corner, the fashionistas, are completely the opposite end. So these are people that invest in everything that moves. All the new shiny objects that come out, we'll buy. We'll invest in there. And you can think about B2C company a lot in there. You can think about bankings, consumer products, those kind of areas where you see a gazillion of experiment going on everywhere. Mobile apps everywhere. We found a bank once. We had 17 mobile applications roughly doing the same thing in various parts of the world with probably 5 or 6 different vendors, totally incompatible, of course, and nobody was talking to each other. So these are the kind of companies that have lots of activity, lots of traction, but you're not quite sure what's the end game. There's not really a vision around it. There's not really a governance for driving the program. So those are the fashionistas. And then the other end, conservatives are quite the opposite. So conservatives are people that actually drive their transformation pretty well, but they're doing it into a very narrow area. So a company that I mentioned, Asian Paints earlier on, actually started by being a conservative. They did something extremely well in their supply chain. And then they went, wow, they saw the results and the gains, and then extended that. So the conservatives very often are people that are stopped by regulation. So think about pharma companies, this kind of stuff, where it's actually quite hard to get some of these applications for regulatory or other reasons. And they can't scale it up, or either that or they don't get the attention of top management. Okay, which is also a problem. So these are the categories of different digital transformation, 4 levels. Now, we had 2 questions when we socialized that with some of our clients and the companies we talked to. They say basically, okay, but surely you say it's applicable to all industry, but surely there are differences by industries. So that was the first question. And the second question, which is even more obvious, they say, okay, but if you do that extremely well, then do you make more money? Okay, which is a fair question, I guess. So here's the answer to the first one. The answer to the first one is, of course, there are differences by industry sectors. It's intuitively, we know that. So we know that if you're a high-tech world, you've been doing that for quite a few years. If you're in manufacturing, you're probably less developed. And you can see it in those numbers. The difference is quite striking. But that was not the key finding. The key finding for us was that in every single industry we looked at, including government, which is not in this data, we found that there were digital masters already operating. So in other words, whichever industry you're in, even if it's not a very digitally advanced industry, there are people that are starting to demark themselves with digital technology and doing great things and getting a performance advantage from that. So that's one good reason enough to say, the time to do this thing is actually now. So you can't, the wait and see type of attitude, we don't believe is a good strategy from what we've seen in our research. So that's the first reason. The second reason is even more compelling, is when we look at financial performance of these people, you can see that digital masters actually perform much better than others. Okay, and then you can see also 2 things, that the different elements, the 2 dimensions actually drive different type of performance. So if you look at the first chart, revenue generation, this is what is driven by digital capability. So in other words, if you invest into social, mobile, and all that, you will get a good return efficiency on your sales. i.e. you sell more with the same number of people, that kind of thing. So it's about revenue efficiency. We couldn't measure growth. And you see that even the fashionistas that are investing everywhere are getting a positive gain, but it's single digit. Okay. When it gets really exciting is when you look at profitability, and this is really driven by the leadership capability. So the vision, engagement, the governance, and so on. And there you see that both our conservatives and our digital masters are getting a huge advantage, but for the digital master, it's huge, it's 26%. Okay, so that gets the attention of a CFO, normally. So 26% is not a small number, and these are averages. And so we compare companies in the same industries, and then we average all the industries. So it's an average, so don't take this number as a guide. But it is significant, so these people are performing better. Now, I'm sure there are at least 100 statisticians in the room, so I will deal with the causality question straight away. Of course, we cannot show, these are correlations, so we cannot show, and by the way, the correlation with publicly quoted information. We didn't ask the company, we went to see their financials from the outside world, so we feel quite robust on that. But we can't prove 100% that it is because they've done digital that they get 26%. So in other words, it could be that the best run company in the world are actually doing digital transformation first. Could be, so in terms of causality. But as observers, researchers, consultants, learners, whatever, we don't care because we want to learn from these people. So if they're the best run companies or if they're doing digital and getting a better return, then we are really keen to understand how do they do it, what are the drivers of this performance. So, but the fact, and we feel pretty comfortable that the companies we've looked at Digital Masters do perform a lot better than the average. And by the way, this is EBIT margin and net profit. Okay, so that's the answer to the second question. Now, let's look in detail at a little bit more. What is it that they do? So, if we look at what we call digital capabilities, the sort of investment in smart technology, it really falls in 3 buckets. No big surprise there. You guys are involved in that every day. It's about revamping the customer experience. So it's about really designing compelling customer experiences with good customer data, with good touch points, with good applications, mobile apps, and the like. So there's a big element of that. And to be honest, but 4 years back when we started the research, probably I would say 80%, 90% of what we were seeing was in that area. Because it's kind of safe, you're talking to the customers and all this kind of stuff. So the second part, which is less developed but is really ramping up very quickly, is the whole notion of digitizing operations. And it falls in really 3 buckets. The first one is digitizing your core processes. Sounds really simple, but you'll be amazed how many companies we've seen that still have HR department counting number of days and holiday and all this kind of stuff, which you can automate today very simply. So process digitization is a key to a lot of the productivity improvement we've seen. Second one is worker enablement. So this is a fancy word to say, how do we collaborate better, connect better, start changing the way we actually work within organization? And it's all to do with the Enterprise 2.0, which Andy McAfee wrote an entire book on that, and you guys are very familiar with that. But it is starting to change the fabric of organization. And the last one is about performance management, which is really data, information. So data flow within the company, getting more visibility, more clarity about how you run a global operation with a lot of transparency, which we didn't have before with this data. And if you do customer experience and operations well, then you can start twitching your business model. And we'll come back to business model because it's a in my view, an overused type of word today